Alright, what's up guys? So we are now inside of Adobe Lightroom and I'm going to get started on editing these images. So I've picked 5 photos to edit for you guys. Basically, I've edited these photos before, but I just reset them all in Lightroom back to the default settings. So these are 5 photos that I picked from my trip to Italy, a place called the Dolomites, late last year. Really beautiful place, and we were fortunate enough to get some amazing images. And so you'll probably notice that they're all sort of like travel landscape style photos. Of course, some of them just landscapes, others have people in them. And so I'm going to show you guys kind of a different way that I would go about editing each image, because each image is slightly different. So that's why I've picked multiple photos for this little tutorial. Alright, so the first thing that I'll do is I'll jump in and pick a preset from my preset pack. So these are looks that I actually use on my photos. If you guys have seen my Instagram feed, it's all very consistent colors, consistent tones, and that's something that I really go for in my photos. And I think that it's not necessarily for everybody, but even if you don't like the style of my editing, I think you'll still pick up a few small tips from this tutorial. All of the presets in this pack are pretty similar with minor variations. I'm actually going to give away a free one for you guys today. So in the description, I'll put a link to a free preset that you guys can download and use. So I'm just going to go through here and find a preset that works for this image. And right off the bat, I'm thinking that this Film 05 is going to work really well for this image. You'll notice that this was pretty much shot at dawn. And so there's not really a big difference between the lightest part and the darkest part of the image. And I think I got the exposure pretty much bang on. And so far, after just applying the preset, it's already looking really great. One of the things that I love in my photos is not having, clipped whites or clipped blacks. So not too dark in the shadowy areas and not too bright in the highlight areas. I like to have a very flat look. And I don't add vignettes or anything like that to my photos. So straight away, this is looking really good. As you can see, I've pulled back the highlights. This is all done in the preset already. I've pushed the shadows up, pulled the whites back a little bit, and increased the black. And so how you can actually create more dynamic range or like a flatter look in your photo without losing contrast is by actually boosting the shadows up. Like this. As you can see, the shadows become, there's more exposure there, and then bringing the black area down. So you can see that we're actually creating more contrast by using that. And if we push it to the extreme with the shadows all the way up and the blacks all the way down, you can see that we've got like a really contrasty looking image. And now the interesting thing about that is, instead of using the contrast slider to affect the contrast in the image overall, we're actually only increasing contrast in the darker areas of the photo. So between like the midtones and the complete black, which is really cool. It doesn't affect the highlights at all. Now, conversely, you can do the same in the highlight area. So that's a really cool little thing to know. Now, I don't like my photos to be this contrasty, so I do like there to be a little bit more detail in that black area. So I'm just going to pull it back to where I am happy with. And that looks pretty good to me there. There's no real adjustments in terms of the texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, saturation, and all those things. The majority of the work gets done in the HSL area. So showing you guys that here, we've got the hue, saturation, and luminance. This is basically just your color controls for the image. And so you can see the adjustments that I've made here. I won't go through all of them. Obviously, it's going to be pretty exhaustive. But basically, that's my basic settings for this preset. I've also got some split toning going on. You can see the settings that I've got there. The default sharpening for the image. This is shot on a Fuji. I don't really like doing sharpening in Lightroom because I don't think it works that well. I prefer to export the image to Photoshop to do my final sharpen. However, because I'm just posting on Instagram, I don't think sharpening is that big of a deal. However, if I was printing this image, I would probably do some extra sharpening. There's a little bit of noise reduction going on. And then we have down the bottom here, some grain added. So 25 grain. I just like my photos to have a little bit of grain in them. I think it looks really nice. You can probably already tell that my photos are more reminiscent of like a film sort of look, and so I think adding the grain really helps to complete that look. The presets are actually based off one of my favorite film stocks, which is Fuji 400H. So that's kind of where I got the inspiration to create these looks from. There's a little bit of stuff going on here in the calibration. So this is more color tweaking as well. But yeah. So that's pretty much the standard controls for this image. Now finally, I'm gonna just fine tune the white balance because I think it was pretty good. However, I'm going to go and make the image overall a little bit cooler. In terms of composition, I like the photo. I like that the boathouse is on the bottom third and the mountains are sort of like approaching that top third. I think it looks really good. However, there's this tree on the right hand side that is annoying the crap out of me. And if I was like super pedantic and I wanted to keep this sort of framing, then I might go in and try to remove the tree in Photoshop with the clone stamp tool. However, I'm just going to crop it out here. So I'm just going to pull in the image a little bit. I don't think the tree is as distracting when it's over this sort of like mountain area here, but when it gets up into the sky, it does sort of bring your attention away. And all we're really losing on this side is a little bit of that boathouse, and so I don't really mind this crop. So I know a lot of people recommend to crop to 4:5 for Instagram if you are posting on Instagram. However, I'm just not really that fussed about cropping to Instagram. I like to have the full photo and just export the full photo and then play around with my cropping later. I just want to basically make sure, if I have a look here, that I do have enough room, I guess, for Instagram when I do export it. And if I drag this down so that we're not cutting off this shadow, I'm actually kind of happy with that composition, and that's what it would look like when I put it in Instagram. So I'm just going to leave it at our original crop that we had. I think it was somewhere like there, and I'm pretty happy with that. So probably the last thing that I would do to this photo, because you know our exposure looks great, the colors look great, is get rid of all of these bark and like leaves and stuff that's in the water here. And how I would usually do that is using the clone stamp tool in Photoshop. You can do it in Lightroom using this spot removal tool. So if I just brush over a spot, then it's going to paste another similar area over the top and mask it, which is good. It is an auto feature, so it will automatically look for a piece of the image that, you know, would, I guess, hide what was behind what you're trying to get rid of. It doesn't work perfectly, so I would highly recommend going in and fine-tuning it if you do use this feature. I like to have a little bit more control, that's why I use the clone stamp. So I'm going to go ahead really quickly. I'm going to get rid of most of the crap in the water, just for the sake of this video. I would definitely do this. I would go to this level. If I was going to print the photo, I would get rid of every little piece in the water. But I guess if you're just like posting on Instagram, maybe just getting rid of the most glaring bits that stand out. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. We're going to move on to the next image. Now the next image is fairly similar, same location, but a little bit later in the day. As you can see, there is a lot more shadow at the bottom of this image and the mountains in the background are very bright. Now on the day, I made sure that I exposed this image correctly, which means that if we increase our exposure, we've still got, you know, a good amount of exposure, not too much grain in this bottom area, which is good. But then you'll notice that at the top of the image, we're actually losing, you know, all this detail in the mountain. So if I bring my exposure slider down, you'll see that we can actually retain all that information. That's the power of shooting raw. If you're not shooting raw, definitely do that. But we can see that we do have like all of the dynamic range in this image. So that's a good thing to start off with. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and pick a preset. I'm going to pick this film 10. This looks decent. First thing I'm going to do is quickly change my white balance. So I think I'm going to like this being a little bit warmer. Looks a bit better on the skin tone of our subject here. And then I'm going to brighten my exposure. Actually, you know what? I'm going to bring back this white slider a little bit just to kind of do a little bit of preliminary work in pulling back some of this detail in the mountain. I think that might be a bit too warm actually. I'm going to sit somewhere around there. I think our tint slider is pretty good where it is. And we've got some saturation going on here, which I'm going to actually pull back a little bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good so far. Now, one really cool thing you can do here to control the overall exposure is use this gradient filter, which is this button here. And what I'm going to do is actually just drag down from the top. And as you can see, that's actually making the top part of our image brighter, which is not exactly what we want. I think I've got some dehaze selected here for some reason. But then you're going to get a new window here that's going to pop up, and that's going to show you sort of your controls for this a graduated filter. There we go. And so I'm going to bring down the exposure. Now you can see that that's affecting the top half of the image. We're getting all of that mountain back, all of that detail back. And now we're going to pull the highlights down a little bit. And to sort of balance out these shadowy areas that I've, coincidentally decreased the exposure in, I'm actually going to pull the shadow slider up a little bit to sort of save some of that detail. Now, as you can see, if I click on the graduated filter again, and I turn this, or delete that layer, you can see what a difference that's made in the overall look of the image. Obviously, it hasn't affected our area down here, which we want to keep nice and bright, but it has brought back that detail in the mountains. Cool, so we're going to actually do the opposite, and we're going to bring up our exposure at the bottom of the image. Got dehaze turned on again. So I've put that graduated filter on there, and I'm going to actually increase this exposure from the bottom up. And you can actually pull these sort of handles in to control how gradual the fall off of the effect is. And so we want this to kind of just roll off just above these boats here. And I don't want to go too crazy with it, otherwise this image is going to end up looking really weird and fake. And so we're going to make it a little bit more natural by bringing back some of this contrast. That looks pretty good to me. Again, what I would do here is probably come in with the spot removal tool or head into Photoshop to actually get rid of all this stuff in the water. It must have rained, or there must have been a storm before we got there, because there was a lot of stuff in the water. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this image. I might play around with it a little bit more in terms of like the temperature, but it's pretty close. Let's move on to the next image. So this one's a really interesting one. I actually shot this from inside a cave. So you can see that in the cave, it's very, very dark. And then we've got a sunset going on outside. So very bright light hitting those mountains. And there is a lot of dynamic range in this image. I'm going to go ahead and then pick a preset again. I think I'm going to go with this one. Looks pretty good. Now the first thing I'm going to do is definitely bring up some of these shadows so that we can see the details inside the cave. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the shadow slider up. And then I'm just going to balance that out with the black slider to bring a little bit more of that contrast in. All right. Just going to increase the exposure and see what that looks like now. And that's pretty good. Now, I'm going to actually try to bring back all of this detail on the mountains here that we're sort of starting to lose. It's not all the way gone, but I would like it to look a little bit flatter. And what I'm going to do for this is actually use the adjustment brush, and I'm just going to brush over this area. And as you can see, there is some spill. It is coming onto the sort of cave area here, but that's totally fine. We're actually going to fix that here by using the range mask. So this is a really great tool. I'm going to choose luminance, and then I'm going to want this brush to only affect this area. I don't want it to affect the shadows in the cave. So I'm going to bring this bottom half of the slider up, and you'll see, actually we need to make an adjustment first. So bring the exposure down. You'll see that as I bring this up, then we start to only affect that area in the highlights, which is really cool. And you can just sort of play around with the smoothness slider as well to make sure that you get a good balance. Okay, so that's pretty good so far. I think what I'm going to do is actually warm this photo up a touch. Because it is sunset, we want some of that nice warm color back in there. and then warm up the photo overall. I think will look good. I think what I'm going to do is try to increase the exposure inside the cave a little bit more. I think it's nice and it could be a little bit more flat. So I'm just going to go back and bring down that adjustment brush a little bit more, and then maybe play with this luminance range mask a little bit more here, just to get it perfect. Thinking that looking pretty good. Might just brush around the edges again just to make sure we got it all. I think somewhere around there looks good. Cool, so I'm pretty happy with that. We might play around with just the overall contrast again using this black slider. I think it was okay where it was. Alright, so that's pretty much all I would do for this image. Okay, moving on to number 4. So this is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. In fact, it's definitely my favorite selfie that I've ever taken. And so what I'm going to do here is pick a preset once again. I think I'm going to go with 09. Cool. So I'm going to increase my shadows and my blacks a little bit, bring up the exposure, and already that's looking really cool. All right. So you can see me there. It's a very grainy photo. It was definitely after the sun had set at this point at ISO 1000 and 1/6 of a second. So I just basically put the camera on time-lapse mode and ran out onto this outcrop, this beautiful view of the mountains in the background. You'll probably notice it's the same mountain range as the last photo, but just taken a fair distance from this photo. And so what I'm noticing straight away is the photo is pretty blue overall, so I'm going to add a little bit more warmth in. And that's looking pretty good to me. We'll play around with the tint slider a little bit, but I'm liking it more on the green side. I think that looks really nice. So I do like that this top half of the image is nice and bright. However, there's not a lot of balance going on here with this green in the bottom, this sort of neutral gray, and then the light in the top. I think what I want to do is maybe bring down the exposure in the mountains a little bit more. Not too much though. I don't want to go too crazy. That's looking pretty good to me. And then on the other side, this is a recurring theme here, sort of balancing out this exposure. You know what? I'm thinking that it might look a little bit better if it was darker. I think that looks good. So we're going to go with that. And I might actually just crop this down a little bit because you want to see me in the photo, I think, a little bit more. If it's too wide, I'm so small in the photo that you won't really see me. So I think that's a pretty decent crop. I might go a little bit wider actually. And you'll see that I'm sitting on that bottom third line and the top of the mountains is on the top third line. You sort of want to run with that rule of thirds. I think that's a really good idea when you're cropping an image. I usually try to do all of my image cropping in the camera and rather than doing it in Lightroom. But I mean, there's always minor tweaks that you can make if need be in Lightroom. So that's good. I'm happy with that. So what I might do actually is come in with this adjustment brush and decrease the size here of the brush and the feather a little bit. I'm actually just going to brush over myself here. As you can see, I might just increase this exposure so I can see what I'm doing. As you can see, you can kind of brighten me up a little bit there. I'm so small in this photo. Probably reduce that just a touch. And that's going to help me, I think, to stand out a little bit more in the photo. It's going to like sort of draw your eye a little bit more. I would do a better job. As you can see, I kind of overshot the edges there. And how you would do that if you did need to go in and make changes is obviously just select your brush, probably go in a little bit closer. There we go, holding spacebar to move around the image. And then if you hold the option key, you can actually brush reverse, so it's actually getting rid of the adjustments that you made. Okay. I think there was a little bit around my head there that I might just get rid of. There we go. Okay. That's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that image overall. I think adding too much contrast to me maybe takes away from the image a little bit. I think that's pretty good there. Just playing with my blacks and shadows again to get that level of contrast that I'm after. What I might do here as well is actually make the sky look a little bit more blue. So I'm going to come in with another graduated filter, and I'm going to stop just before the top of the mountains here. And then I'm going to pull the temperature back a little bit more, just adding in a little bit more of that sort of blue hue. And I think that helps really to balance the green in the bottom half of the image. Okay, so overall I'm really happy with that, and that's going to be my final image. So we'll move on to the next one. Now, as you can see, this is a really dark photo, basically because I did want to preserve all of this nice sunset color. That's kind of a recurring theme in my photos, is that I like to shoot a little bit underexposed, but you also have to know your camera and its limits. With these Fuji cameras, I was shooting this on the XH1, I believe. These cameras are really good at underexposing. You can underexpose them a fair way and obviously still retain lots of data, as you can see in the shadow areas here. Alright, so right away for this image, I'm going to go ahead and pick a preset. I'm going to use a similar one to last time. And I'm just going to increase my exposure until I'm happy with the highlight area. I don't want to clip too far, but I do want to get some of that nice sort of color and exposure back into the sky. And then the first thing I'm going to do is come through with the graduated filter again and increase our exposure in the bottom half of the image so that we can see Sam. And so that's looking pretty good. I might pull the shadows up as well. There we go. Now that's looking way, way better. So just playing around with the exposure again, I think that's pretty much bang on. You can increase your shadows a little bit. I think that looks good, and then balance it out with the black a bit more. I'm really liking that. The only thing I'm not liking so far is sort of these dark corners and the sort of graduated sort of exposure fall off towards the top. So I'm going to come in with another graduated filter, pull that down, and then just increase my exposure here in the top part of the image. And I'm actually, to get rid of these dark corners, I'm going to just boost up the shadow slider. And the black slider as well, a little bit. So I think that's looking pretty good overall. I'm happy with that. The photo does look a little bit blue, so I'm going to come in with the temperature. That's looking good. There is something on Sam's shirt that's annoying me, so I'm going to actually get rid of that. I think it must be a logo or something. Just going to use our spot removal to get rid of that. That's looking pretty good. In terms of the crop, I like that. I might play around with actually putting Sam on the left side of the frame, so he's actually walking to the right hand side. Not actually sure what I want to do with this photo now. I think I'm going to crop in and have Sam walking left to right in the frame. So I'm going to put him a little bit left of center, just to sort of get that, I guess, story of him moving through the photo. I think it lends itself a little bit more to this image. Alright, so I think the photo overall, just sort of when I'm looking at the other photos in the catalog, I think it does look a little bit too pink. So I might go ahead and actually change the tint slider, bring more of that green hue back into the photo. So going to -17 on the tint slider. And to be honest, I'm pretty happy with where that is at the moment, and that's probably where my final image will sit. So I'm going to go ahead and export these photos for Instagram. If you guys aren't following me already, I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out more of my photos. But essentially, I would get the whole catalog or my whole selection of images, and I would right click and go into the export window. And now from here, you would choose where you want to save the photo to. In this instance, I'm just going to save it to my desktop, put it in a subfolder called Italy, and then I am going to leave this file renaming just blank. So I'm just going to have the file name, the original file name there. That's fine. And then the most important part to me is obviously choosing our output format, which is going to be JPEG, and then the image resizing. So I usually resize it to fit 2,500 pixels along the long side. It's a little bit larger than what Instagram takes, but I find that it's a good happy medium. It doesn't really, crop the file down too much. And then you've also got a little bit of a higher resolution photo that you can, have on your phone, or you can even upload this to your website, and it's going to be absolutely fine. And I keep the quality at 100 as well. That's pretty much all I'll do, so I'll just go ahead and export. And that is pretty much the end of this tutorial. If you guys have any other questions, anything else you want to know about how I edit my photos, definitely send me a comment in the section below, and I'll do my best to answer you guys.